Vice President Al Gore. Is he in for the fight of his life? Tonight on Washington Week in Review.
This is Washington Week in Review for Friday, October 1st, 1999. Now, here's moderator Gwen Ifill.
Good evening. A big week in presidential politics involving Democrats, Republicans, even movie stars. Democrat Bill Bradley suddenly a viable candidate, forcing Vice President Al Gore into a defensive crouch. Now the vice president saying he is the underdog. The Republican field increases by one, decreases by one, as the frontrunner begins putting Congress at arm's length. At the Supreme Court, a new session begins Monday. The justices preparing to rule on disputes ranging from the death penalty to grandparents' rights. And Ronald Reagan's legacy. Does Edmund Morris, the official biographer whose book hit the stores this week, get the final word? Here to sort through the week's events, the reporters and columnists who cover them. Gloria Borger of U.S. News and CBS News. Linda Greenhouse of the New York Times. Richard Burke of the New York Times. And Michael Duffy of Time Magazine. Speaking of Time Magazine, Michael, part of me thinks that maybe you started all the bad news this week for Al Gore, that maybe there's now an authenticity battle that's brewing between Al Gore and Bill Bradley, and is it a big deal, or is it just overblown?
It's a big deal. There comes a moment in every campaign, Gwen, when the candidate realizes that he's in big trouble, and that happened this week for Al Gore. He took one look at the polls showing Bill Bradley ahead of him in New Hampshire last weekend. He gathered his advisors at his house on Monday night and said, we got to shake things up. And so a couple days ago, he decided he'd move his campaign to Tennessee, lock, stock, and barrel. He challenged Bradley to a series of debates. That's something an underdog does, not something a confident frontrunner does. And today, in the latest in a series of personnel shakeups that seems to have been going on all summer long, he fired his longtime pollster Mark Penn and brought in a new person to take surveys. Now, what's happening and what has Gore a little bit worried is this. If you talk to people in the Democratic Party, activists, party leaders, state party chairmen, they say, you know, I'm beginning to worry that perhaps Bill Bradley is a better bet to take on George W. Bush than the vice president. I talked to 12 state party chairmen in the last week, and they're all publicly for Gore, but they all say privately, you know, he's gone too many places, given too many speeches, made too many proposals, and he just seems a little bit unfocused. Whereas we look at Bradley and we see, my gosh, you know, he's doing just a few things, he's making a few speeches, and he has a sort of low-key, quiet style that people seem to like.
Isn't this just a PR move?
Going to Tennessee?
Yeah, you know, they say K Street to Kmart, or, you know, it's a little...
Sort of like a country and western music song.
And is
the
the vice president moving to Nashville?
Well, they made the announcement the same day that they expected the very bad news to come out that would show that Bill Bradley was ahead of Gore in fundraising. So it wasn't good to have something bold and different to say on that bad day. And by moving to Nashville, they were able to lower the costs, which they're having trouble doing. They're spending money, you know, hand over foot. But there is something else. He did say, and this is a bit of a hoot. He said, I'm going to Tennessee to get in touch with my roots, which is a little bit funny since Al Gore has lived most of his life on Massachusetts Avenue in Washington, and he's not even moving to Tennessee. His campaign is.
But isn't it saying too much, even for all the bad news he went through this week, isn't it too much to say that Al Gore is an underdog?
It is too much, and he still has a long way to go before he, you know, around the country, before you actually see Gore fall behind, say, in the South, in the Midwest. At the moment, Bradley's strength is concentrated largely in New England, New York, New Jersey, places where he used to play a lot of basketball, or, you know, was a senator for 18 years. If you ask Democrats around the country and other parts of the nation, they'll say we're still pretty much for Al Gore here. The problem is that when a wave like this hits, it can change pretty fast.
You kind of get the sense that, you know, there's a lot of political reporters in town who are bored with the same old story, and this is kind of fresh, and how much is this a Washington media-driven sequence of events, and how much is real? I mean, the president said the other day, well, at this time in the campaign, 8 years ago, I was third.
Right. When you really look at what's going on, it's not just a race about who's going to win or who can win. There's also an ideological conflict brewing in the party. For the last couple of months, Gore has been running a sort of, I'm the candidate of continuity. I'm the legatee of the prosperous Clinton era, and he hasn't made a lot of big proposals. Whereas Bradley, really, he's making no little plans. He's proposed, you know, to register all handguns in America. He's proposed that we amend the Civil Rights Act to include homosexuals. And this week, in his most boldest proposal of all, he said, let's insure every uninsured American. So in addition to this race that the Democrats now have coming up, they also are going to get a debate.
How strong a candidate is Bill Bradley? Is he just benefiting from Al Gore's missteps, or do you think he's been clever in how he's positioned himself?
When you ask the Gore people, can you point to any mistakes that Gore's made? They kind of look at you and, no. I can't. But they also say that we're going to start spending some time in the next couple of weeks pointing out the things that Bill Bradley has done as a senator and how they might differ from what he's done in the campaign finance. He's made some flip-flops, they say, on specific policies, and you're going to start hearing that from the Gore campaign. And then we'll find out, I think, just how good a candidate Bill Bradley is.
But Bill Bradley still has a long way to go. He raised a little bit more money than Al Gore did, so it looks good for now.
Right.
But how long can that last?
He raised. It's interesting to note about the money. You know, they both raising, I guess, $6 million in the last 3 months. But Gore is spending it at a phenomenal rate, whereas Bradley's turning out to be a much more economical guy, and that will give him a bigger war chest.
I think drunken sailor may be the term you're searching for.
It's going to give him a lot more money to spend when this fight actually begins.
Michael, one thing I don't understand, Gore has had years and years to plan for this race. I mean, everyone's assumed he'd be the front runner for years, and he's made so many missteps. Why?
Yeah, this is the question everyone is asking, and you can find as many answers to it as you can find Gore advisors. There are hundreds of those in town. There's almost a bumper sticker you can buy now, honk if you've polled for Al Gore, because so many people have. He's got hangers on and family retainers, and one of the things he's trying to do this week, and it's very late, is try to shed some of that baggage.
But he has fewer advisors today, and then when they move to Nashville, they'll have even fewer again. Yeah. Rick, you've been literally coast to coast this week, rubbing elbows with Hollywood stars and trying to figure out who's giving money to whom. We know that the Democrats seem to be in terrible upheaval this week. What were the Republicans doing?
It's been quite a dizzying week for me and for the Republican candidates. I was in California.
You look a little jet lagged.
I am a little jet lagged when I was in California just the other day, and on one day I got up at 5 in the morning, rushed up to Bakersfield to catch up with Governor Bush, then rushed to Simi Valley to catch up with John McCain, who was meeting there with, had an appearance there with Nancy Reagan, and then I had to get back to Hollywood for the Warren Beatty dinner. Had to. I told people I didn't fly out for that, but since I was there, I might as well go there. But anyway, what we had at the beginning of the week, and it's hard to remember now because so much has happened all week long, but Dan Quayle dropped out saying the race is, essentially saying the race is all but over. George Bush is so far ahead. Then we had a couple of days later, John McCain officially entering the race saying the race has only begun. You know, I'm out here, I'm ready to fight. Then we had the campaign finance reports come out, and we had Governor Bush, $56 million, 56, shattering more records.
Making the Democrats look like they hadn't raised anything at all.
That's right, and smothering all the other Republican candidates instead of in terms of fundraising, except for Steve Forbes, who can obviously dip into his own fortune. Then we had another reshuffling with Pat Buchanan edging closer and closer to bolting from the Republican Party and running on the Reform Party ticket. And so we've had quite a lot of activity, but when the political dust settles, what we have is what we've had for months and months and months. George Bush is still way far ahead of everyone else, and Republicans are getting more and more anxious about how do we knock this guy out, because that's their only hope.
Rick, when John McCain this week made a little substantive news when he criticized Pat Buchanan and distanced himself from Governor Bush, is there a chance that the dynamic that we're seeing on the Democratic side could play out on the Republican side, that there could be actually a substantive challenger to Governor Bush, or is the money disparity just too late now?
It just seems right now it's hard to see, but I hate to say that the voting is not until 4 months off, so anything could happen. But the reason George Bush decided not to take on Pat Buchanan in the way John McCain did is he's so comfortable, he didn't want to alienate his supporters, so he could just say nice things and not enter the fray. And so when you're that far ahead and that comfortably in the lead, it gives you a lot of advantages. Just today at the Christian Coalition meeting, it was quite a striking departure from past meetings, because here the front runner, Governor Bush, went out there and did not pander at all to these religious conservatives. He did not talk much about abortion or gay rights or anything, or school prayer. He just gave basically his stump speech. And Bob Dole could never get away with that 4 years ago.
That's true.
And because
in fact, he did that and didn't get away with
that.
Right,
exactly. And the other candidates today could not get away with it. But the crowd gave him a standing ovation.
George Bush also did something interesting this week, and that is he distanced himself from all these congressional Republicans who have been rushing to endorse him. And he said, wait a minute, you know, I'm not so sure I like your budget plan here. I don't think you should make these cuts the way you're planning to make them. Yeah. Why was he brave enough to do that? Or is that a good thing to do? That may not be brave. That's easy,
you could say
actually.
Maybe that was a miscalculation. Yeah. It's the first real rift we've seen between Bush and these congressional Republicans who have gone in lockstep with him up till now and saying, our agenda is your agenda. But I think it's another example, by and large, of him Bush feeling confident enough that he could just go up there and even distance himself with those House Republicans. And I think it's more a sign of strength than of weakness.
Now, I had a flashback this week when George Bush got up on the stump on Wednesday and said, I think Pat Buchanan has a vendetta. Now, he didn't say he has a vendetta against me or my father or my family, but everyone in the room was thinking it's the old Bush Pat Buchanan problem again. What's this about? Why do these two, sort of forces just not able to get together?
Well, I think it's a good example of how the politics of personality drives a lot of candidates and drives their passions and how they behave toward one another. And there's a long history there of tensions between the Bush family and the Buchanans and the Perot and Ross Perot. You remember in '92 when Buchanan took on President Bush and Perot ran, and they both hurt his candidacy, his re-election prospect. And Governor Bush has a long memory, and he doesn't forgive easily. And he could have just tossed it aside and said, I'm presidential now, I'm not going to get into these personal frays, but he just couldn't help himself. In fact, I asked him about that, and I said, my question to him was, how would you describe Ross Perot's contribution to American politics? Very sort of innocent question, and his relationship with Pat Buchanan, and he just went off, and he just said, they hurt my father in '92, and I said, well, is there bad blood there between, your family and them? And he said, well, I'm not going to mention, I don't know what their motivation is, but, oh, no. You could say personal vendetta, who knows? But he raised the notion of a personal vendetta. And the reason this is important is that Pat Buchanan is thinking of running on the Reform Party ticket. And if he does, that could really hurt George Bush if he is the nominee. Okay. So this is a dangerous situation.
Well, Rick, I'm glad you came back from Hollywood after hanging out with the stars. We'll grill you off camera about exactly who you really meant. Linda, the court comes back first Monday in October. We've been expecting this every year, but every year it's not as momentous as it's going to be this time. We've got a big year ahead for the court.
It is a big year. Usually it's kind of risky to predict the court, but there's no risk at all, I think, in predicting that this is really going to be a bang-up term. The court doesn't have a lot of cases, but they have some very carefully chosen cases. And basically, the justices have their arms around everything that people are debating in the country right now. I mean, whether it's campaign finance, patients' rights in the healthcare setting, government aid to parochial schools, and I have to mention the ongoing debate over federalism. What's the boundary between federal and state authority? Just this week, the court did some preliminary action before the actual term begins on Monday, and they took, as an example of this, they took a very fascinating case on whether the Violence Against Women Act of 1994, a federal law that lets victims of sexual assault sue their attackers for damages in federal court, whether that's constitutional or whether it was beyond the authority of Congress in the way the court is now confining congressional action. So there's a lot going on there.
I know you don't like to predict what the court's going to do, but do you think that by the end of this year, having taken up these cases, that we're going to see laws which are significantly changed?
Well, we're certainly going to see whether the court means what it seems to have been saying. I mean, in this federalism area, the court seems to have said in several cases that have dealt with sort of arcane areas of the law that, contrary to what many people have thought for many years since the New Deal, that it's within Congress's authority basically to define a national problem and prescribe a national solution.
Even if Congress isn't?
Even if, when Congress decides, on those rare occasions, decides to step in and say, okay, violence against women, a national problem. Another case the court's going to hear, for instance, age discrimination on the job. A national problem, we're going to open up the states to being sued for age discrimination by their employees, the state employer. And that's the case that the court's going to decide whether that's constitutional or whether whether states are entitled to constitutional immunity. So we'll see if they mean what they seem to have been saying.
When you take an issue like HMOs, which is, it's going to be a big political issue. In Campaign 2000, it's a big political issue in Congress. Should you be able to sue your HMO is something that every politician's talking about and saying one way or another, yeah, you should be able to. What about the court on this?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised the court took that case. That's something else they did this week. They said they're going to decide a statutory case on whether someone can sue their HMO, which gave them care malpractice, as part of an employer-provided health plan, for basically putting cost considerations ahead of the duty of care that they owe to each individual patient. And that was not on my list of a case I expected, because I figured the court would say, it's statutory, there's not a constitutional issue here, it's a moving target in Congress, let's hang back. But obviously something got their attention there.
What about education? They seem to have taken some cases in the area of how we fund education, public and parochial, at a time when Congress is also wrestling with this but not getting very much done. Might there be some change there? Or?
Well, what the court's going to decide in that area is whether a federal law that tells public school districts to use their federal money to buy computers and also to provide computers for private school and parochial school classrooms within the district, whether that's constitutional or whether that violates the separation of church and state. And it's not going to resolve the so-called voucher issue, but it's a kind of a shot across the bow, and we'll see where the court's tending in that. And I guess we shouldn't be surprised that issues that are being fought on the Hill and in the state legislatures are also reaching the court, because we're sort of all in this together, and people bring disputes to the court just like they bring issues to politicians.
Linda, at the Christian Coalition meeting today, the court came up, a lot of Republicans were saying, look, if a Democrat's elected next year, that's going to be the end of the court for us. And it's come up more and more in the campaign dialogue. How important do you think that is as a political issue in a presidential contest?
Well, I think what that reflects, and it's interesting that came up in that setting, is coming up, in a way, it's coming up more on the right than on the left, right, because all these federalism cases have been 5-4 on the states' rights side. And, it's a doctrine that is hanging by a thread. And it's almost the other side of the coin of the way the abortion rights community looked at the court fearfully back in some years ago, before the court sort of came to rest and settled on abortion rights, when that seemed to be hanging by a thread. So there's big stakes. They're watching this very closely.
I have to ask you quickly, Linda, about grandparents' rights. That sounds like a topic for an afternoon talk show, not for the Supreme Court. How did they come to take that up?
Well, this is a case, a number of states have laws that give third parties, including grandparents and other relatives or even unrelated people, the right to seek court-ordered visitation with children, with grandchildren. And the state Supreme Court in the state of Washington struck this law down. They're saying that it violated the fundamental due process rights of parents to control who has access to their children. And I think the court took it, maybe not so much because of the grandparent issue per se, but because they're a little bit wary about these fundamental rights being scattered around the countryside, and I think they want to take a good look at it. Well,
as these cases come up, we'll talk about it some more. Gloria, the historians are up in arms, the Reagan loyalists are up in arms, all about Dutch, the Reagan memoir by Edmund Morris.
And the journalists are up in arms.
And that's where we come to you. You've read the book from cover to cover, you've written a column about it, and
save your money. This is a book that every political junkie has been waiting to read for the last 14 years. I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. And because Edmund Morris, as the official Reagan biographer, was given this kind of mouth-watering access that any of us sitting around this table would dream of. Oh, yeah. Sitting in the Oval Office next to the president, there during the Iran-Contra crisis, there during the Moscow summit, sitting there trying to cheer him up, the little muse when he doesn't feel well, talking to the family, right? This is some talking to the powers that be, eyewitness to history, all the rest. And I'm sad to say that, having read this book, I think it's a lot more about Edmund Morris than it is about Ronald Reagan. And
he uses this semi-fictional technique in which he invents himself as a narrator and then places in places in Reagan's life, which, I don't know, does it work?
It's a little weird. Well, let me refer you to the book jacket here, in which it says that this unique relationship led to a, quote, literary technique, which is what they refer to. And what it is, essentially, he says, I'm going to invent a younger Edmund Morris, who is a contemporary of Reagan's, and that's going to be a way to get into Reagan's early life, you know, when Reagan was the lifeguard and saved 77 people, and when he was, you know, an actor and all the rest, and when he was married to Jane Wyman, and so I'm going to have somebody who is a peer of Reagan's. The problem is that aside from that little note there, they don't tell you about it. So it's sort of an inside joke. When you're reading the book, then you wonder, who is this guy Morris? I mean, Edmund Morris is a lot younger than Ronald Reagan. And then you end up learning all about this other Morris's personal history. He's got a wife, he's got a son, he's got a friend, another friend. And you realize that he kind of gets in the way. It's like you're in a movie theater and a 6'10" tall-inch person sits in front of you with a hat on, and you want to say, could you just take off the hat because you're blocking my view?
So what do we learn about Ronald Reagan? We learn about this Morris character, but what about the president?
Here's the saddest thing to me, and maybe it's because we've, you know, I covered Capitol Hill when Reagan was president, but we don't learn anything really much new about him. We know that Edmund Morris was disappointed to a certain degree. He calls him an airhead, so he sort of blames it on Reagan. On the other hand, he says that he was a great leader. He says he was a cold guy. On the other hand, he was a compassionate speaker. So I don't think Edmund Morris actually made up his mind about Ronald Reagan. And the worst thing is, there are so many momentous events during the Reagan years, whether you're a Reagan fan or not, you can't deny it. And for example, the 1980 election, 2 pages. The Moscow summit, 2 pages.
Gore, I'm wondering, I share your concerns, but I'm wondering, are we too, inside the Beltway, are we too tough on this guy? I mean, Reagan is a hard subject to write about, and maybe, and we've all had subjects that we've written about where we just can't get through to them or can't understand them. Maybe he tried his best, and this is his
I'm
best.
sure he did. I'm sure he did. But what I'm saying is there are lots of biographies that have been written about Ronald Reagan. Lou Cannon, Los Angeles Times, wrote a wonderful biography about Ronald Reagan. And a lot of people who know him say, you know, there isn't that much of a mystery about Reagan. What he was what he was, and that the biographer should not blame it on the subject.
Maybe we're calling this the wrong thing. Maybe it's not a biography.
Well, it's kind of a ficto biography, if you will. I don't know, you know, after docudramas and all the rest, you know, maybe this is kind of the natural progression, which I think would be quite sad. My problem is that I wanted to get some more insight into Reagan's character, his personality, because of course he was a great leader in many ways, and I did not come away with that at all.
Does he like him? Does either the younger Edmund Morris or the older Edmund Morris like Ronald Reagan?
I think he did like Reagan. I think he was very conflicted about Reagan, and I think that comes across in the book. Let me read to you something he wrote. He said at one point, I was fleeing Ronald Reagan out of a sense of failure. Things were not going well for the official biographer. I'm afraid I'd have to agree with that. But he doesn't tell us as much about Reagan as we want to know. Lou Cannon is going to point out this weekend in a review that the whole Robert Bork controversy was not mentioned once in this book. And some people think that was pretty definitional in many ways for the Reagan presidency. And so as a journalist, perhaps you're right, Rick, we approach it as if we had this access. Oh my God, what we would learn. And I'm sorry to say, it's not there.
Maybe not. We'll welcome opposing views. But before we go, a final word. I've been overwhelmed by the good wishes sent my way as I move to the head of our little table here at Washington Week. We promise you 3 things: smart conversation, hands-on reporting, and the same fair and lively analysis you've come to expect from us on Friday nights for 33 years. I owe a great debt to the moderators who filled this chair before me, but especially to the ones who brought me into the fold, Paul Duke and Ken Bodie. Join us every Friday night. We'll always have a lot to say, and we'll always want to hear what you have to say as well. You can contact us at our new and improved Washington Week website at www.pbs.org. See you right here next week on Washington Week in Review.
Washington Week in Review was produced by WETA, which is solely responsible for its content.